Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Fund Affordable Housing, Protect Unhoused People, a housing justice educational forum by Making Housing and Community Happen. Last week, we lost an important champion for housing justice in Pasadena, Councilmember John Kennedy. He was a crucial ally in several of our campaigns and was a recipient of one of our Housing Rockstar Awards. So we will begin this evening's program with a moment of silence in his honor, in the honor of John Kennedy. Okay, so welcome again, everyone.
Can I just add one thing about John Kennedy? I think it's important to mention that we had an important victory last week. Rezoning church land for affordable housing was approved, not as all of what we wanted, but a significant portion. And John Kennedy came and cast a deciding vote, even though he was very ill and he died a couple of days later. That's how committed he was to affordable housing.
Yeah.
So this evening we have with us Kath Rogers from the ACLU speaking about the initiative to provide legal protections to unhoused people as a protected class. And she will also speak about a transfer tax to fund affordable housing. She'll speak on both of those topics, and after each topic we will have Q&A, a time for people to ask some questions and get some feedback. And then after that, we will have breakout groups to discuss with each other some of the details of the transfer tax. But before all that, I'm going to tell you a little bit about our organization, Making Housing and Community Happen, through an update on our teams. So I'm going to share the PowerPoint. Some of you have seen this before, but some of you haven't, so we'll go through the whole thing. So this is what's happening at MHCH, otherwise known as our team report. So Making Housing and Community Happen is that we're a very small nonprofit. We only have a few part-time staff. We actually have 2 full-time staff that are not paid, Jill and Anthony. They put in tons of time, but they're not paid by our organization. But we also have more than 50 volunteers, and some of them work on our 4 different teams. So I'm going to talk about our 4 different teams and one that we recently spun off. So first, safe parking. There are about 15,000 people living in their vehicles in Los Angeles County. And until recently, there was no safe parking program in the San Gabriel Valley. But on April 1st, 2021, we helped launch the first safe parking program in the San Gabriel Valley. This pilot program has 5 safe places to park, access to a bathroom, case management, which includes referrals to job placement and permanent housing. As a result of that, several people have already been permanently housed through this program, and we are expanding to other San Gabriel Valley sites. So we're expanding to El Monte, Glendora, Arcadia, Temple City, La Puente, and Baldwin Park. Now, all of these we're trying to expand to, but at this point, we already need volunteers for El Monte, Glendora, and La Puente. So if you can volunteer, or know somebody who can, then contact Wendy McGrail. And you can contact her by email, Wendy B. MCGRAIL, Wendy B. McGrail at gmail.com. If you want to refer someone who's living in their car to the program, then contact Myra Bueno, and you can contact her by email or phone. Her email is myra@foothillunitycenter.org. That's Myra spelled M-A-I-R-A at foothillunitycenter.org, or you can call her at 626-358-3486. That's if you want to make a referral to the Safe Parking Program. Next is our Congregational Land Committee. This committee consults with congregations to build affordable housing, and they have been in discussions with 65 congregations across Southern California, and they just completed their first educational cohort where clergy and other congregational leaders went through a 4-module training, and now they're ready for their the next phase of consultation to prepare them for possibly having affordable housing on their land. So what we run into a lot, though, is a lot of congregations don't have the right zoning. And if you don't have the right zoning, you're probably not going to get anything done, because a lot of affordable housing developers won't touch a site that doesn't have the right zoning. And even if they do, it's going to add several $100,000 worth of cost and several years of time to the process. So, so what we're trying to do is change zoning across whole jurisdictions. And so we have been able to do that. These are called religious overlay zones. We've been able to do that in Sierra Madre. They were the first one in California. Little sleepy Sierra Madre, the first one in California to have a religious overlay zone for affordable housing. It's been done outside of California. The city of Seattle did it, but they were the first in California. Next was Yorba Linda. And then just last week, Pasadena. We got an overlay zone in Pasadena. Wasn't all we wanted. I'll talk more about that, but we did get something. And in a number of other Southern California cities, we've gotten it into the housing element, which is the plan for the next 8 years of housing. And then we're also working at a state level with a state coalition. So each of these overlay zones is going to be a little different from others. Some of the local ordinances might cover sites that the state ordinance doesn't cover. The state ordinance might cover sites that local ordinances don't cover. That's why we're attacking this at different levels. So next I want to talk about affordable and supportive housing advocates. This is our main advocacy team, which advocates and organizes around multiple housing justice initiatives. A couple of their major victories in recent years have been 69 units of permanent supportive housing for seniors experiencing homelessness at the corner of Fair Oaks and Orange Grove, which will be called Heritage Square South. Our team won approval of this project 3.5 years ago. And since then, the city has pulled together the financing, chosen a developer, and approved architectural plans. So ground broke for that project earlier this month. And usually the process for pulling everything together like that takes more than 3.5 years. So we're very happy about this. Another more recent victory was the 111 units of affordable senior housing, 10% of it for seniors who've been experiencing homelessness, which is going to be right in our civic center across from City Hall. This is an artist rendering of it on the screen that you see right now. The beige part will be the new construction. The white part's already there. It's 111 units of senior housing, 10% of it for unhoused seniors. ASHA team has also been working with the Pasadena Affordable Housing Coalition on Pasadena's housing element, which is a plan required by the state to house all our residents for the next 8 years. ASHA team has also been working on transitional housing programs for unhoused people in our city, and also working with the Pasadena Tenants Coalition to get rent control on the ballot, something that some of us have been trying for over 20 years to do. We finally did it. So rent control is going to be on the ballot. We'll hear more about that later, but please make sure to tell all your friends and family and everybody you know to vote for it. It's going to be on the ballot for Pasadena. And finally, the ASHA team has been working on the religious overlay zone in Pasadena, which we won last week. Well, we didn't get everything we wanted, but we did get some of what we wanted. So we're going to have a celebration and reflection tomorrow night, July 27th, 5:30 to 7:30 p.m. Dinner will be provided, pizza and cake, and that covers all the major food groups. And it's going to be at the Orange Grove Friends Meeting House, which is 520 East Orange Grove Boulevard in Pasadena. And I'm putting RSVP to Jill. I didn't ask her about this, but she's ordering the food. So RSVP to Jill so she knows what food to get. So it's jill@makinghousinghappen.org or .com, whichever one, doesn't matter. I put .org on here. All right, so Community Land Trust. Our Community Land Trust team isn't actually part of us anymore because they have incorporated as the San Gabriel Valley Community Land Trust. They have their own 501c3, their own nonprofit. If you don't know what a community land trust is, it's community land trusts make housing more affordable by allowing people to buy just the house without having to buy the land, because the land is owned by a nonprofit, and that keeps the housing permanently affordable. So this helps people who would not be able to buy a home to be able to buy a home. So the San Gabriel Valley Community Land Trust will be the first CLT in the San Gabriel Valley. Next is our North Fair Oaks Empowerment Team. This is a group of churches on North Fair Oaks that is working to beautify and not gentrify that part of the city, which you can see part of it pictured here. They want to do it with signage, more trees, sidewalk repairs, and affordable housing. some of these churches are interested in having affordable housing on their land. And one of them, at least one of them, will be able to do it because of the victory we won last week. And they have already been working on that. So also they have partnered with the Complete Streets Coalition to do something called Complete Streets, which makes the streets usable by not just cars, but pedestrians, bikers, and people using different modes of transportation. So they also started something called the 20 Percenters Group, which is people who've been displaced in Pasadena. They meet weekly and support each other and strategize. And this is based on it's named after the recent ordinance in Pasadena, which prioritizes 20% of affordable housing for people who have been displaced from Pasadena in the last 10 years. Also, we have a congregational network of more than 20 congregations that participate in MHCH. And if you want your congregation to be a part of that, you can contact me, Bert Newton. My email is bert@makinghousinghappen.org. And it has to be .org, can't be .com. bert@makinghousinghappen.org. Phone number, you can text or call 626-993-7958. So that is the team reports. And next we're going to hear, we always like to do a housing story to put a human face on what we do. So this week we have a video, like I just got to, okay. This week we have a video of Janae Johnson, and we're going to play that for you. So Anthony, do you have the video for us?
Anthony, part of it's blocked out.
My name is Janae Johnson, and this is my housing story. I'm 36 years old, born and raised in Pasadena, and lived here until January 2018, when my family and I could no longer afford the rent. Now I commute to work in Pasadena and to worship at Bethel Missionary Baptist Church on North Fair Oaks. I'm a child development teacher, hairstylist, and cleaning specialist. My name is Janae Johnson, and this is my housing story. I'm 36 years old, born and raised in Pasadena, and lived here until January 2018, when my family and I could no longer afford the rent. Now I commute to work in Pasadena and to worship at Bethel Missionary Baptist Church on North Fair Oaks. I'm a child development teacher, hairstylist, and cleaning specialist. My parents, my three sisters, and I were always good renters. My parents worked all of their lives, and now in their mid-70s, operate their own small house cleaning business to make ends meet. We rented our last house here for about 22 years before we got the notice to vacate in an 8-month range, because the owner had to pay off debt as soon as possible. Our rent back then was about $24.50 a month, and in 8 months, we could not find a 3-bedroom home at that price in Pasadena. Most 1 to 2 bedroom apartments at the low end of the market then started at $2,500 a month, and moving fees were really high. We had no place to move when we left our home. We had to go to Ontario, where for the next 6 months we lived in motels with half of our possessions in the trunk of the car and the other half just neatly arranged in our motel room. We looked in cities as far as 50 miles east and west on the 210 freeway without success. Finally, tired of finding so many surprises in every motel room, like drug paraphernalia, we asked for help. Our family split to cope, moving in with friends and family who could offer us a room at that time. Some of us moved to Lancaster, some of us stayed in Ontario. I moved to Las Vegas. Just before the pandemic, my parents and my 3 sisters rented a house in Pomona. During the pandemic, I returned from Las Vegas to join them. Since then, I adapted a new way of living. My biggest expenses right now are gasoline, my car maintenance, and food. I miss living in Pasadena. It's a joy to work in my hometown. It's where I worship. But I often pray that God will get our politicians to consider the damage we do to our environment when working people in the millions must be in LA traffic for long hours before and after work. I also pray that housing can be affordable for other families from my congregation and the surrounding communities. I dream in prayers of living in Pasadena's diversity and a stable job I can get to on my bike or the bus, and able to visit my parents with love and support at this stage of their lives. I pray for a Pasadena whose community reflects the diversity of God's creation, where we can live with compassion and cooperation.
Ukraine deploys Western weapons.
Excellent. Thanks, Anthony. Yeah, there were a little bit of block, but we saw most of it. Most of it was pretty clear. So that was great. Janae is part of the 20 percenters group that I mentioned. So that brings us to the main part of our program tonight. Kath, I'm losing your last name here.
Rogers.
Rogers, right? So Kath Rogers is here to talk about unhoused people as a protected class and the initiative to put transfer tax back on the ballot. Kath Rogers is a staff attorney at the ACLU of Southern California. She works in the Dignity for All project, where she works to advance the rights of unhoused community members through litigation and policy advocacy. Prior to her law career, Kath worked as a community organizer for more than a decade on local and state campaigns to advance social justice. So first, she will talk about the proposal to make unhoused people a protected class. Kath, welcome to our Housing Justice Forum.
Thank you, Bert, and thanks everybody for having me. I'm really excited to be here with everybody. This is such a well-organized, effective group of people, and I'm excited for future collaborations, and also excited to hear about this Pasadena rent control ballot measure, which is really exciting. I do have some slides. I don't know if I can share my screen.
Yeah, I'll make it so you can do that. And there's a little bit of feedback. I'm not sure what that's about.
Okay, is there still feedback? It might just be from folks who are not yet muted.
I don't hear it myself.
I do.
Yeah,
No, let me turn off this fan. Is that better?
keep talking. We'll find
Talk some more.
That's all I've got on my end. I just turned off my fan.
that
So.
sounds much better. Thank you.
Oh, great. Okay. Okay. Can everybody see my screen? Okay, great. All right. Well, thank you so much. As Bert said, I'm Kath Rogers. I'm with the ACLU of Southern California, and I'm on our Dignity for All project, which is embedded within the economic justice team at the ACLU of Southern California. And on my team, we have two really big kind of North Star goals. One is to fight back against the criminalization of poverty. And the second one is to advance a right to housing. And so both of the campaigns I'm going to talk to you about today kind of fall within those categories. Folks may think about the ACLU as primarily a litigation-driven organization, which historically is true. And we do fight, to protect negative rights, which are, the right to be free of search and seizure, the right to free speech, the right to freedom of religion, things like that. But increasingly, as my team, or the team I'm on, the economic justice team, has realized that we can't fully enjoy our civil rights, our negative rights, unless we have some positive rights, unless you have a roof over your head, unless you have health care, if you're saddled with fines and fees, you can't really enjoy your civil rights. And so that's where these positive rights come in. One of the things that's unique about my role is, even though I'm a civil rights lawyer, a lot of my time is actually spent on policy change. And that's because we have what's called an integrated advocacy model, which recognizes the limits of the current legal system. There are a lot of things that are wrong in our world, as we know. Not all of them are illegal. In fact, most of the things that are wrong in our world are unfortunately not illegal. The mass, racial inequity that's baked into our system, the economic inequality that's baked into our system. A lot of these things are legal under our existing legal frameworks. And that's why we work hard to advance policy changes, including the 2 campaigns I'll talk about tonight. And so let's get into it. First, I'll address, the problems that we're working to address, and then talk a little bit about some of these policies that we're working to change. So let's just talk about where we are right now. We're in the middle of a housing crisis, as we all know. More than 160,000 people are unhoused in the state of California. The LA County unhoused population is over 66,000. We have nowhere near enough subsidized affordable housing or public housing to meet the demand. As we know, vouchers are not coming close to meeting that demand. I have clients all the time who have housing vouchers who can't use those vouchers. There's a huge waiting list for Section 8 vouchers. Many people are on lists forever and just don't get those vouchers. And even when you do get them, there's a lot of landlord discrimination that prevents you from actually using them. The housing crisis does not fall equally on everyone. More than a third of unhoused youth in LA County are LGBTQ. 1 in 3 unhoused individuals in the state of California are Black. Eviction rates are much higher for Black renters, and unfortunately, new home ownership rates for Black residents is at historic lows. So the burdens of the housing crisis do not fall equally, and that's of course due to historic and structural racism. And what the problem that we're going to talk about first, and the campaign in response to it, is unfortunately, instead of responding with housing first, which we know is, and studies have proven is the most effective response to the housing crisis, instead governments in municipalities all over the country, instead of investing adequately in affordable housing, governments are choosing to invest in criminalization, which is not cheap, by the way. Most of our government budgets are spent on policing, which is a very expensive thing to spend money on. And so just as an example, 72% of cities have at least one law that restricts camping in public. So if you try to shelter yourself in a tent, this is a crime in most cities across the country. Over half of cities across the country have laws that prohibit sitting down or lying down. We've had a lot of litigation over this particular issue in the city of LA, where I live. There was a historic case called Jones v. City of Los Angeles that challenged LA's sit down, lie down law. And that was the first of a series of cases that said that it's actually unconstitutional under the 8th Amendment to criminalize someone for conduct that they can't control. Basically, that case stood for the concept that at some point, we all have to sit down, we all have to lie down, we can't constantly be, moving, and therefore it's unconstitutional under the 8th Amendment. It's cruel and unusual to criminalize conduct that we all have to do. And if you're unhoused, you're not unhoused by choice. There are not enough resources, there's not enough housing for you to become housed, and you have to sit down or lie down. So a lot of these laws are subject to legal challenge. There's also laws that prevent people from living in their cars. Something I do relatively frequently is tow hearings to help unhoused folks get their cars back. I have a client who recently, we did her tow hearing for her. She got her car back, and she, she's living in her car, as nearly a quarter of unhoused folks in the county of LA live in their vehicles. And so laws that criminalize living in your vehicle have a horrible impact on people whose home that is. So these are just some examples, but essentially everything you do becomes a crime when you are unhoused. Like I said, sitting down, lying down, sheltering yourself, putting down your possessions on the sidewalk. I helped to challenge a law in the city of San Diego. It was called an encroachment code, where everything that you set down on public property was illegal. So Of course, they were only enforcing that against unhoused individuals. They weren't enforcing it against a lawyer who puts their briefcase down on the sidewalk. They're only enforcing it against unhoused individuals. So, you know, some of our clients, you know, they set down a coffee cup, they set down their bag. One individual, he had all of his items in a little cooler. And he would sit on his cooler in the day, and he would take out, you know, his sleeping bag at night and put that out. And the police would come by, and, you know, every time they saw him with that cooler on the sidewalk, they'd give him a ticket. And there was one woman I remember who had upwards of 40 citations for the exact same encroachment statute, because you just couldn't live in the city of San Diego at that point without getting an encroachment ticket for setting something down on the public right of way. So this is the government response that we're trying to address, that basically is making houselessness a crime instead of investing in real solutions. So one thing that we do historically at the ACLU is we sue to challenge these laws. You know, I'll just give you some kind of big picture overview of some of the legal challenges that we at the ACLU and others are bringing to these types of laws. I already mentioned the Eighth Amendment, which is, you know, one theory that has been used to challenge these types of laws. Another one is due process, or the Fourth Amendment, because another aspect of criminalization is what are called unhoused encampment sweeps, where police come to people's encampments where they're informally living, you know, whether that's their tent or, you know, where they're storing their belongings, and routinely basically confiscate and throw away people's belongings, rather than, you know, providing services or, you know, coming out with outreach workers. It's typically a police-driven force that comes out to do these encampment sweeps. We're investigating and doing some field work right now in the city of San Bernardino, and the sweeps there are so pervasive that I just talked to a gentleman who had been involved in 25 sweeps in the past 2 years, meaning police had come to his encampment and completely destroyed all of his property 25 times. And police right now, from what I've been told, are giving people about 3 minutes to pack up all their belongings. Otherwise, their property is completely confiscated. One gentleman that we interviewed has HIV, and his HIV medication was just thrown away. And so right now he's trying to live without that medication. You know, I've talked to people whose IDs have been thrown away, their EBT cards to get foods, you know, food stamps, you know. So this kind of criminalization is making it a lot more difficult for people to survive. So those types of sweeps are subject to Fourth Amendment and procedural due process challenge. There's also kind of an evolving theory around substantive due process for state-created danger. Basically, the theory is that if things that the government is doing to you makes you worse off or in danger after after the government action, we can challenge it on that basis. So all of which is to say, we have a lot of creative legal theories, and they're all very limited. Lawsuits, to me, sometimes feel like whack-a-mole, because cities are very good at coming up with creative ways to find loopholes. And so we sue one jurisdiction for criminalizing people, and then they find another way to continue the criminalization. So that brings us to this policy change that we're seeking, which is seeking to amend California's anti-discrimination law to make housing a protected class. Now, in theory, if we are applying laws differently to unhoused people, you would think that that's an equal protection violation, right? Because we're all entitled to equal protection under the law. But unfortunately, because housing and housing status is not a protected class, we can't, there are a lot of challenges to bringing an equal protection lawsuit. So this campaign, we're calling it the Equal Rights for Every Neighbor campaign. And the problem that we're working to address is that right now, discrimination based on housing status is not explicitly against the law. So we hope to use this campaign to challenge the type of criminalization that I've talked about, the encampment sweeps that we talked about, exclusion from public spaces, banishment outside of city limits, and other types of tactics that cities are using to criminalize people. So specifically for anyone who wants to look up the code section, we're looking to amend the California Anti-Discrimination Code. It's Government Code 11135, which, as you can see, has a lot of different protected classes. Now, this law protects you from discrimination from government actors, from state actors. So this wouldn't apply to private businesses, but this discrimination code applies to the government. And you can see there's a lot of protected classes here, right? We have sex, race, color, religion, ancestry, national origin, ethnic group identification, age, mental disability, physical disability, mental condition, genetic information, marital status, and sexual orientation. And this code section has been amended over the years, and it's become more and more inclusive. There have been more and more groups added to this list. And also the legislature has clarified that there's an explicit private right of action under the law. So every time with these amendments, it seems to get broader and broader. And so that's what we'd like to do. The amendment we're looking for is actually pretty simple. It's only 2 words. We want to add housing status to that list that you see right there. So we would just add 2 words to this government code to ban discrimination on the basis of housing status. And we believe that would serve a couple of goals. One is that criminalization is not really seen as discrimination right now. It's the government's standard response to houselessness. And so we want to shift the narrative, and we want to say this is a form of discrimination, and it has a disparate impact on unhoused individuals. And under this code section, we can bring disparate impact claims. Also, this will give us another legal tool to really challenge discrimination and call it what it is. So this would give us another private right of action to challenge criminalization by government actors. So what have we done so far? We had hoped to get an author for this bill.
Kath,
Yeah,
I think we need to wind up because we need to move on to the next issue.
sure.
Yeah. So maybe we could have some Q&A on what you've shared so far.
Why don't you give her a minute to wrap this up, and then we can.
Okay. Okay, that's great. Yeah.
Sure. So just in terms of where we're at, we did not get an author this year. We're hoping to get an author in the 2023 legislative cycle. So now we're building support for this idea. We're getting endorsers. We have a coalition that includes, Disability Rights California, Housing California, and other groups. And we're, continuing to meet with our partner groups and really just build support. And it might be a multi-year campaign to make this legislative change. So yeah, I would love any questions on this or anything we talked about.
So Denise put put 2 questions in the chat. So let me read those for her. She said, with the Supreme Court's new denial of privacy rights in the Due Process Clause, would this affect the ACLU's lawsuits?
Yes. It's horrible. It's just horrible. Yeah, it's really awful. And yeah, in every space that I'm in, I think lawyers are thinking about whether to file in federal court, especially on due process issues, and certainly on any substantive due process issue, anything that you think is going to be appealed up. So, that would be a question of whether you file in state court or federal court. And I know some people are, opting for state court because we have stronger constitutional protections in California. So short answer, yes. And relatedly, I think that this campaign becomes that much more important because when we're stripping rights, at the federal level, it's that much more important to enshrine rights in California statutes and in our Constitution.
She's also asking, will the new 988 number instead of 911, maybe with that, the police won't be the ones to handle this anymore.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And I think that that new number is, largely, being used, I know, both kind of as a suicide hotline resource as well as a mental health crisis intervention line. Yeah, we absolutely, police should not be the first responders to houselessness. We need people who are trauma informed. We need people who, are outreach and caseworkers and don't have guns. So yeah, absolutely. We completely support non-police interventions to houselessness.
And Sonia is asking, what has been the legislators' response so far?
Well, we haven't found an author yet, so unfortunately, we don't have a legislative champion yet. But this has not. Sometimes these campaigns are multi-year campaigns, and especially when you're seeking kind of big picture change. We have this on a couple of issues where we're really envisioning where we want to go, and we know it's going to be 2 years, 3 years, or more, and we still have to push it because. That's the vision for where we want to go.
Yeah. So Michelle messaged me a question, but she also raised her hand. So I'll let Michelle ask it.
Yeah. I was just wondering, what would this cover other than being unhoused?
That's a great question. So it would apply to state actors in past cases for under this code section. It's addressed, jail, police, school districts, and also private actors that are functioning as a state actor, like they're funded by the state and therefore qualify as a state actor. So I mean, we're really looking at this in the houselessness context. But, could it be applied in other contexts like renters? It's a good question. I don't have an answer. And I think maybe that will be, down the road for courts to sort of sort that out. But you're right that housing status and some of that will be carved out in the legislative intent, right? In the legislative hearings, because, courts often look to that.
So, Denise is asking, has Henry Stern seen this?
I don't know. Is the answer.
Okay, that's all I can say.
Maybe
All
it
right.
should be.
And Jill is saying, how would you define unhoused in this?
Well, so actually the legislative change is only 2 words. It would only add housing status to this code section. There would be no other text at this point. This is all we're proposing. So, a lot of that would be in the legislative intent. We'll be at all the committee hearings for this, and but yeah, and we're looking at it really in the context of people who are currently unhoused, who are experiencing discrimination that has a disparate impact on people who are currently unhoused.
And Michelle has another question. Michelle, we can't hear you for some reason.
Sorry. This appears to be directed at the police and other governmental actors. Is there a reason for not covering the private market?
That is a really good question. I think it's just doing one thing at a time, because there is another, I mean, as you know, there's another code section that deals with discrimination for private actors in California's, in the California statutes. So I think it's just one thing at a time. The main thing we were focused on here is the criminalization by government actors. But, once we make this change, I think amending all the anti-discrimination codes to include housing status would be a great idea. But this is the specific legislative campaign we're pushing right now.
Okay, so we allotted 5 times for the Q&A and 5 times. Did I say 5 times? 5 minutes for Q&A. And so we're done. We're at the 5-minute mark now. So let's go on with the next presentation. Kath, can you talk about the transfer tax?
Absolutely. Yeah.
By the
So-
way, you're amazing. Thank you.
Well, ditto to you and this group. So just before we get into the solution, I just want to talk about, a little bit about the problem, although I know we all are intimately aware of the problem. So in terms of the history of public housing, houselessness and being unhoused was relatively rare as recently as the 70s, because there was an investment in public housing. That changed in the 1980s when the federal government gutted a lot of the funding for public housing, and also lowered taxes for the wealthy. So by the 1990s, there were 5 million more people who needed affordable housing units than there were units available. Now only 1 in 5 households that are eligible for affordable housing receive it. And what we're going to talk about is government spending. So as we are probably all on the same page, budgets are moral documents. One of the things that we at the ACLU do on our economic justice team is we monitor municipal and state budgets to look at budget equity, and we promote progressive taxation schemes. Scheme is not a good word. Progressive taxation policies, and we promote policies that prioritize housing first, and significant investment on the part of the government. For those who are not familiar with the term progressive taxation, what that means is having that it's based on people's ability to pay, that the wealthy are paying more than people who are living in low income or extremely low income households. So this can include a tax on, for example, mansions, a mansion tax, which is what we're going to talk about today, or other luxury items, or it can just be, a progressive tax based on income. So here's the solution that we want to talk about today, and it's actually on the 2022 ballot. I'm really excited about this campaign. It's called United House LA, and let's get into what it is all about. So United House LA, it's a tiny tax on what the campaign is calling mega mansions that will generate significant revenue to reduce houselessness and protect low-income seniors. It's a tax on property transfers of properties that are $5 million or more. So it doesn't actually apply to most property transfers. It only applies to those 5 million or more. It's a citizens initiative. It's written by homelessness and housing experts. It's not going through the political process. It's going through direct democracy through the ballot initiative process. This tax would then be used to immediately buy and build housing for unhoused people, and invest significantly in affordable housing. That's the main bucket. And then the second bucket is protections to help keep people in their homes. So we'll get into some of the nitty gritty here. So again, this is an example of progressive taxation, or what we could call equitable funding. So 97% of property sales are completely unaffected. This would only actually affect 3% of property sales, because it only affects properties 5 million or more. And the benefits of this initiative would go to people who are currently unhoused or extremely low income, at or below 15% AMI, or 30% AMI. This would be the largest investment in affordable housing in the city of LA history. It would generate about 875 million annually. And it's indefinite. That's one difference between this and prior measures, is that prior measures have focused on one-time taxes or one-time investments. This would be ongoing forever unless it's, repealed someday, but it would be, an ongoing investment. So what does the measure do? It provides, it builds housing, it provides renter assistance, and it'll create jobs in the building trades. That's why actually this measure has significant support from unions. And that's been a really great alliance on this campaign, is we have a number of union supporters, and all of our meetings are held at union halls. All of the campaign signature efforts that have been paid have all been, through union labor as well. There's also a strong oversight piece because all the revenue generated is going to have a citizens oversight board and an inspector general that would oversee the funding to make sure that everything is transparent and accountable. So like I said, there's two buckets of money basically that the tax would fund. One is affordable housing, and 70% of the funds from this initiative will go directly into affordable housing. 30% goes to renter protection. So the important thing here is we need more affordable housing, but we also need to keep people housed. And so that 30% is for things like right to counsel, to keep people, to have an attorney in eviction court, funding grassroots groups that give know your rights trainings for tenants, funding city oversight for anti-harassment ordinances, things like that, everything that can keep people in their homes. So that's a really important part of the measure because it goes upstream to prevent people from becoming unhoused. So I usually don't include these slides. I know that some of you all are a little bit more in the weeds on this issue. So, we don't have to spend long on it, but this is just, so if you want to dive a little deeper into that 70% affordable housing, these are the types of housing that it's going to fund. So both supportive and affordable housing, preservation for things like ADUs, a stabilization fund that would fund shortfalls in programs that are going to, at risk of losing their funding, some alternative models for affordable housing, as well as some cooperative models, including social housing, and I believe community land trusts could be in that 10%. And importantly, I said that there's strong labor backing for this initiative. There's local hire as well as labor provisions built into the construction of the affordable housing in the measure. So looking at the 30%, which is for renter protections and preventing people from becoming unhoused, some of that's going to go to eviction defense. Some of that's going to go to emergency funding to keep tenants in their homes. Some of it's going to go to tenant outreach. Some of it's going to go to income assistance. And some is going to go to nonprofit organizations and city departments to help enforce laws that protect renters. So right now we have a broad base of support. There's over 150 organizations, ACLU included, that are backing the measure. One thing that all of you can do, if you have an organization, we would love your organizational endorsement. You can just go right to the website, upload your logo, and you will be added to the organization's website as a list in the list of supporters. So that's something you can do right now to take action if you'd like. And all of the organizational endorsements are very much appreciated, and they add credibility to the measure. Here's where we're at right now. So in good news, the campaign has gathered almost 100,000 signatures, and the measure is currently on the ballot. We don't have the measure letter yet, but that will be in the next week or so. I've heard we should expect that. So the next step is to educate voters and vote yes on this in November. It just requires a 50% +1 vote. And right now the polling is looking really good. The last poll that I saw looked, it was between 60–63% support. So looking really good, but there's going to be opposition to this, and we need to have a strong get out the vote and voter education campaign. So what can you do to get involved? In terms of the first campaign I talked about, stay tuned for a bill next year, continue to oppose criminalization. In terms of United to House LA, if you or anyone you know is in the city of LA, we would love for you to get involved in this campaign. If you're not in the city of LA and you know folks, please let them know to vote yes. You can volunteer. There's canvassing efforts you can get involved with. Again, you can endorse the campaign with your organization. And if there's any other community groups that you want that are specifically in LA, the campaign would love to give a presentation at those organizations. So that's all I have on that one, but I would love to take any questions.
I'm putting the link in the chat here. Second here. Jasmine asked for the link. This is the link to United to House LA. So, and Denise has a question. Let me see. Yeah, okay. What became of those initiatives we passed for affordable housing / homelessness? So I guess former initiatives. I don't know if you know about those.
Is that the measure H and HHH? Is that it?
Yeah, so there's measures H, HHH, JJJ. So H and HHH were one-time funding pots, and JJJ was a incentivization kind of measure for affordable housing. All three of those did pass, and some are city, some are county. Even if the thing is, it's more people are becoming unhoused every day, and those were both one-time investments and incentivization. But we always knew that even if they passed, it was not going to be a magic bullet, right? I mean, we supported those back in the day, but there are actually some pretty clear I guess distinctions between those and this one, which are that this is going to create the largest investment in LA city history, and also it's an ongoing source of funding. The other one is that this is the only measure that I know of the three that I mentioned that goes upstream and actually works to keep people housed as well, to stop the bleeding, basically. But again, nothing is going to be a magic bullet, but this will make us a serious difference. This is will provide an unprecedented level of funding, and also unprecedented level of tenant support.
So Michelle has a question. Will there be funding to make sure tenants are not paying more than 30% of their income on housing?
Yes. So all of the yes is the short answer. I mean, all of the housing that's being funded is affordable housing for extremely low income and the most vulnerable people in the city of LA. And then there's also, in the tenant protection piece, there's actually some cash assistance and income assistance for tenants. So yeah, I mean, the goal would be, that's the goal.
And she followed up with, what entity will administer this measure? A governmental body?
Yes, so there's a citizens oversight board, like I said, and there's a fund that's created just for the funds that are raised in this measure. There's an inspector general, and basically those bodies will then administer the funds and ensure that it's done in a transparent way. It's done in accordance with the letter of the of the letter of the statute, or the letter of the law. So those are the two bodies that would be responsible for the fund distribution.
And is this an ordinance or a charter amendment?
This is no, it's not a charter amendment. So it would be an ordinance.
But voted on by the voters.
Yeah, exactly.
So Jill has a couple of questions.
Yeah, I put it in chat. What would be the steps that you would recommend if we tried to do something like this here in Pasadena? Where do you start?
I think the first step is a really broad coalition. And I think you also need to have some specific commitments for people who are groups that are willing to invest, because, it's not easy and it's not cheap. And it's a lot of, people power. I know on this campaign, there's one paid staff member, and then a lot of the coalition groups are dedicating their staff time. So for example, the ACLU, we're devoting staff time to the measure. We also made some contributions to the measure, and all of the coalition partners are, contributing resources as well, because there's a significant advertising budget too, because that's a big part of getting out the vote. So this one was not an entirely volunteer signature drive, because any initiative that I've worked on, the signature numbers are so high, and the signature window is so short. There were a little over 5 weeks to gather 100,000 signatures. So there were volunteers out in the streets, and then there were also paid staff members out there as well gathering signatures. So it was it's a pretty big initiative. But again, there's only one staff member. So I would say the main thing is just having enough groups to dedicate the people power and the, financial backing to make it happen. And then also to have the reach to do the voter outreach that you need to do.
Jill, was there another question?
Yeah, it relates back to the previous topic. And the Idaho case that made so much of the discrimination illegal. I'm not sure how cities can get away with it now. What's happening with that?
So that's Martin v. City of Boise. And that's the 8th Amendment case that challenged and struck down an anti-camping law. And it's an important legal tool that we have, and a lot of civil rights lawyers around the country are using the Martin framework to challenge similar laws. The problem is that cities are creative at finding ways around it. And so one of those ways that they get around it is the actual letter of the law says that as long as the number of unhoused people exceeds the number of shelter beds available, it's unlawful to criminalize for conduct you can't control. But if they, for example, keep 50 beds that are controlled by police, then the police can go out and say, oh, well, we offered you a shelter bed, or, and I've seen that it's a pretty disingenuous offer, and a pretty carceral approach, but that's one workaround that cities have been using. Another is locational. So banning people from, sleeping or sitting down in most of the city, but not all of the city. That's one approach that LA is taking right now, is their anti-camping law will apply in much of the city, like, near schools and parks and libraries, and, all these different places. But, there might be the side of the highway that it doesn't apply to, so cities find pretty creative ways to get around it.
So Michelle is asking, she's saying we had 180 days to gather rent control signatures. Why did your campaign only have 5 weeks?
I think it just depends on the city and the municipality that you're in. I don't know the answer to that, but I think it would probably be the city code.
Well, excellent. Good, great presentation and great questions. We want to do breakout rooms, but first we're going to try a poll to kind of see.
I do have one last question.
Okay.
And I misspelled surprised, so I apologize to everybody.
Okay.
But there was a question earlier from Portia regarding those that are disabled. I think Sarah Jones also had the same question. So I'm just curious about them not being a protected class and what kind of protections they do have.
I think I noticed in the list that they are in a
They are
protected.
listed. Okay.
They are listed. However, what I was referring to is the kind of patchwork legislation that people have gotten through over time. I mean, I'm not saying that in a negative way, but like the H, the HHH, the JJJ, and so on, in attempts to help with housing problems. these are not like legal definitions, but it'll be that, you know, a developer, for example, could build a building and have to give a certain percentage for low income. And among those people would be listed veterans, the elderly, mentally ill, homeless, but there's no designated category that says people with developmental disabilities should be one of those groups that served. So what it does, it's not that they're discriminated against, it's just that there's absolutely no incentive for a developer to include them. That's what I meant.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a really good point, Portia. And I think that that's yeah, that's one thing that we're seeing. I won't take us down a rabbit hole in another issue, but that's something we've been looking at as well. And I think that's a policy question too, is, you know, raising that with legislators and putting that on the radar.
Yeah, I'm going to try to work towards doing that with this other group that I'm in, the Lanterman Housing Alliance. Lanterman Regional Center is an organization that serves a large catchment area for developmentally disabled people in Los Angeles. So I'm going to try to work with them and get a sponsor and do all those things. It was actually on track right before the pandemic, and then everything just fell apart, and now trying to resurrect it again, just to get that recognition of that group.
Thanks.
Yeah, that's so important.
Yeah.
And also just the acknowledgement that housing is a form of healthcare. And, you know, it's the first thing people need, especially with developmental disabilities when folks are on the street. Yeah.
So Kath, I don't know if you're seeing the messages. Raul says it's a very informative presentation. Kath, you are a true champion. And,
Aww. Well, ditto for this entire group, seriously.
First, I want to say a huge thanks to everyone that's come tonight. And I'm sure you've probably been following the news about the Pope and his confession and apology. I think it's just, you know, obviously way overdue, but finally, you know, really just the rape of a culture, language, identity, along with untold deaths of innocent children and many, many others. And so I really want to say that I respect the Pope's courage, and it takes a lot of courage to be a leader. And it means also confronting things head on at times, and in the location where it actually happened, where the injustice happened. So I think that the fact that he went to those places is very powerful. I just finished a course called Reconcile Pasadena, and we talked about kind of a theology of place and the importance of locations, like memorials, like Anthony McLean's. But when you think about the Pope, that's way off in Canada. And do we have the courage to recognize some of our own local histories? And on North Fair Oaks and the whole area of Northwest Pasadena is historically where only people of color where African Americans were allowed to live. We did have a time of public confession a few years ago. I'm going to put in chat a link to our prayer vigil where we confessed land use injustices against Indigenous people all the way to present. Tonight, you've heard a little bit about I guess some of our disappointment. We were able to get something passed last Monday. It was so exciting. But it's only going to help those in the northwest part of our city, where churches that are on commercial properties and not throughout the whole city. And that's really what we need. It's very important we recognize that confession is important, but it's just not enough. It's only a start. And so that's why we seek to make racial justice a core value of our efforts. We're just so incredibly grateful for all those that are committed to this vision and came out last week. 50 plus people came out for this win. And again, it was just a partial win, but every single person that came is valued, and God values every single person and equally. And so we seek to do the same. And we fail at times, but we just pick up and keep going. So it took us 2 years, to work on this policy, to make it throughout the city. We hope to have it for in a year from now to come and finish the job. But we also need to think about another policy, and that's something that John Kennedy gave us a challenge and a passionate plea, to think about. In one of his recent articles in Pasadena Now, he challenged us to look at the 710 stub. So since Caltrans will be returning all of that land back to Pasadena, there'll be a lot of focus groups and a lot of thinking about how to use that land. And that land that has been a freeway all these years is where Black and brown people lived, and they were removed. So are we going to take advantage of that, like Bruce's Beach, and to make reparations and not just confessions? So that's my closing statements for us tonight. I just want us to be thinking about all of this, including what Kath has shared with us about the importance of truly protecting all people, making housing a protected class, as well as making sure that our money is really being used in a progressive way, in a more equitable way. And so I hope that we can just continue to talk about these ideas, get more people on board, so that if this is God's will, that we get this policy, if we get a transfer tax and get a protected class, that we'll have the momentum, and we'll have the people in place needed. So thank you for all who came today. We really appreciate each of you. God bless you.